Okay, Julie, take it away.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Roth, and hi, Harvey, got a wave. I am the Senior Energy Analyst at the Office of Sustainability and Innovations in the City of Ann Arbor, for the City of Ann Arbor, and I host these Ann Arbor Solar Stories. It's part of the GLREA's Solar, Energy Thursdays, where we come together on Thursday evenings to do either solar stories coming from Ann Arbor, solar stories coming from Detroit for Detroit Solar Stories, throughout Michigan for Michigan Solar Stories, and sometimes for an energy forum on a different topic, which are really, really oftentimes interesting, and I learn a lot. And you can hang out with all of these really wonky energy nerd people and talk about energy stuff. And if you're like me, it's better than the Michigan hockey game I just left, although it was close. Anyway, I usually have slides, but I think they're on my other computer, so I'll just introduce the series and our speakers without a slide. So the GLREA, for those of you who don't know, is the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, and they are a 501c3. You can become a member to support them. They do great advocacy work around renewable energy in our state, both in terms of educational forums like this and a lot of advocacy in Lansing, which, if you're paying any attention to anything these days, we desperately need organizations like the GLREA to be advocating for us in Lansing and for the planet and for the people. So I am a huge fan of the GLREA, and so I'm honored always to host these little Ann Arbor Solar Stories. And I'm especially excited about today's Ann Arbor Solar Story because we have Drew Cox and Aaron-Boockvar-Klein here. They are the president and vice president in reverse. I think I did that backwards for the Students for Clean Energy, which is a student group on University of Michigan's Ann Arbor campus. Their mission is nothing short of decarbonizing the university's energy portfolio via advocacy and projects. And they're also developing their members to become leaders in the energy space when they graduate. And we are honored to have them here with us. And I can't wait to hear about what they have to say. I also need to mention the sponsors of this event are EGLE, which is the Department of Great Lakes and Environment, Great Lakes and Energy in the state of Michigan, McNaught and McKay, Homeland Solar, Harvest Solar, and Iron Ridge Racking. And GLREA is very grateful to their sponsors for the event. So that's enough of that. And I'm going to hand it over to Aaron and Drew, and I hear what they have to say.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Julie. Like Julie said, Drew and I are both seniors at U of M, leadership for SFCE this year, SFCE being Students for Clean Energy. We've both been involved in SFCE and campus sustainability efforts all 4 years that we've been on campus. We've learned a thing or two in that time, and we're hoping to share some of those insights with you tonight. So the way we're going to go through this is we're going to talk about 4 projects that have been done through SFCE. Some we've been personally involved in ourselves, some other students took on. And from those, we're going to pull out 2 trends, those trends being 2 different overarching approaches towards making an impact on the university's energy portfolio and also visibility of clean energy on campus. One of those approaches we deem more successful than the other. And by successful, we mean not just that it resulted in a deliverable and not just that that deliverable was of significant impact, but also how much student time and effort went into those projects, because at the end of the day, how intensive it is for students ultimately determines whether or not it's a replicable approach. And that's really, really key for us. So we're going to go through those 4 examples and then pull out 3 key takeaways, and then we'd love to have a little Q&A. So with that said, I'll start with 2 examples. This is the approach that we're going to highlight as having been historically more successful. The first example is a proposal from a group of students within SFCE for the university to enter into a power purchase agreement. This was first put together in 2017. So it was a year before Drew and I started at U of M. And the approach they took was to research and put together a sort of report that ended up being a proposal for U of M to enter into a PPA. And the sequence of this proposal was context on what a PPA is, what different types of PPAs are. So for the University of Michigan, it ended up being a virtual PPA. Examples, so precedents of other similar institutions having entered into PPAs, and then a more in-depth case study of Ohio State's PPA. And from there, they did essentially a thought experiment on what this could look like for U of M, a couple of different scenarios, depending on what rate for energy U of M got in a PPA, but ultimately what the cost savings were out of that, because of course the university is interested in cost savings. And then just for fun, they also looked at the CO2 savings, because as students we're very interested in that component. And then they finished with recommendations for how the university could move forward. So some ideas for the logistics of actually entering into a PPA, but they stopped there. They didn't talk to prospective developers. They said, this is the idea. This is how it could work. This is potentially in the ballpark of what you could save, which means it's a really good idea. You should take this forward. And then they had support from a faculty member, and they were able to present on their findings. And I don't actually know the details of how it got to whichever decision makers, but it was basically hands off from the students once they presented their findings. That was the scope of their work. So that's 2017. Fast forward about 3 years, and the university announces it's entering into a virtual PPA. And recently they just released an RFP for a second PPA, and those two PPAs combined are going to cover all of the university's purchased electricity. So that was a very cool result to see. It took some time, but once they presented their findings, it was hands off. They didn't have to do anything else with it. The second example along these lines is similarly a proposal, this time for a revolving energy fund, which is a mechanism for financing energy efficiency upgrades on U of M's campus in buildings and other infrastructure. And like the PPA, this went through context on what a PPA is, examples of other universities having done it with a more in-depth case study of Harvard. We've seen good success when we can compare U of M to Harvard or Ohio State. And then a look at savings from past energy efficiency projects at U of M, and then potential for more of those projects based on some information we had. And again, from that, we backed out what potential savings could look like if the university implemented a revolving energy fund, and then some ideas for logistics on how it could go forward. And then we presented on it. This was 2019 now. And about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago today, the university announced seed funding of $25 million for a revolving energy fund. We had proposed $15 million, and we thought we were being ambitious. And then they came back and said, we would like to do $25 million. And we said, I mean, they didn't actually say this to us, but in our minds, we said, okay, you can do that. We're happy with that. But in both cases, the scope of the work that the students did, they were able to do on their own time and on their own timeline. They might have talked to someone at the university to get some insights, but ultimately all of the research and writing they were able to do at their own pace. And that's going to be critical when we come back to the takeaways. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Drew to talk about two other examples that have also had success, but with additional challenges looped in.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing all that, Aaron. Can everyone hear me okay? Just a quick thumbs up. All right, thank you. Yeah, so Aaron just kind of highlighted an approach that Students for Clean Energy has implemented that's led to more success, you could say. Just kind of this approach of doing independent research and providing it to the university for them to act on their own timeline and with their own resources. The next approach I'm going to mention is what we're going to refer to as a direct involvement approach, which was on a few instances, our club tried to work in tandem with the university and trying to be an active part of the implementation process. We found that this has been the less successful of the two approaches, predominantly due to the fact that the university as an entity operates a lot differently than an undergraduate student mind does, in that their timelines are much more far out than those of a student who only has 4 years or maybe a semester to work on a project. And we've just found that trying to communicate with the university to maintain a constant stream of progress is often a challenging approach when we're going about it in this way. So the first example I'm going to give of this is a project of my own that I've been working on since my freshman year that's since been discontinued up until very recently, but it's been a big part of my college experience. And my time at Michigan wouldn't be the same without it. So without further ado, that example is what we've referred to as the Solar Block M. So what this project's initial vision was a highly visible solar array somewhere on Michigan's campus in the shape of Michigan's iconic logo, the Block M. The original inspiration for this project was the undergraduate student who I was working on with. We were both in our respective high schools trying to get solar on our roofs, and we had saw that a few years prior, Ohio State had made a solar array in the shape of an O. So we initially saw that as a challenge to ourselves to keep up with our previous ambitions and do it in a way that captivates the spirit of the school. This was kind of right on the heels of the university's commitment to carbon neutrality in 2018 as well. So we saw this as sort of a visual landmark that could be going somewhere on Michigan's campus, such as the flagpole or the diag. We have these iconic elements that represent what the school stands for. We thought the Solar Block M could kind of be a latest and greatest landmark that would show that Michigan's making serious progress on carbon neutrality and sustainability. So as I have mentioned, I was working on this project for 4 years. So I think that kind of lays out how difficult and time intensive it can be to work with the university when you're starting from scratch. Like I mentioned prior, this was an idea that hadn't really been fleshed out like a power purchase agreement or revolving energy fund. It's something that was very unique to an entity like the university. So this required a lot of emailing and meetings with university officials from day one, talking about the scope of what we wanted to do, where we wanted to put it. We had to consult the representatives from our student life department, our Department of Facilities and Operations, our Department of Architecture, Engineering, and Construction. There were a lot of actors involved that complicated the matter. It was often difficult. We would maybe not hear back from someone for a couple months or so. We would come up with a proposed location for them to hear out, only for trees to be planted in that exact location 2 weeks after we send out the email. So the communication wasn't always there. And that was particularly difficult. So how I've described maybe up to this point, how the Solar Block M evolved through my freshman year, in that we had this idea. We knew that Michigan wanted to take carbon neutrality seriously, but we didn't have any money, so we didn't have any skin in the game. And it was just difficult to be on the same page with the university. Fast forward to sophomore and junior years, we gained some legitimacy. We gained the support of some advisors and professors and some local philanthropists who were willing to contribute to the cause. We were able to raise up to $50,000 towards the end of my sophomore year, and upwards of $75,000 to $80,000 at the end of the junior year. We were finally making some headway when working with the university. They were finally answering our emails, being a little more responsive to us. But there's still a little bit of opacity in our interactions, in that we're trying to determine what would the structural feasibility of an array like this be, being that it's a unique shape. how would it handle wind load and just physically stand up? What were the challenges that brought in? What were the challenges of hooking it up to the grid and dealing with weather and potential vandalism, all that stuff? We found that rather than the university relying on the research that we had come up with, they were instead sticking to the guys that they have traditionally engaged with when it comes to construction. So I think a good example of this is we're looking for solar developers or some procurement providers that would provide a sound cost estimate for how much this would cost. Based on our own research, we estimated it would be around $100,000, but we really wanted to hone in on that. But rather than working with a developer that we trusted, the university instead wanted to pivot to a contractor that they had previously worked with that was an engineering firm and was highly credible in that sense, but didn't have a ton of experience with renewable energy installations. So a couple months go by, this firm conducts their study. They conclude that the estimate for the array is $400,000. So to back up a little bit, I didn't entirely mention the specifics of the array. So this solar array was supposed to be a 20 kilowatt array, which in the scope of energy would do very little to mitigate Michigan's energy footprint, but it would still have that symbolic impact, as we mentioned. So a 20 kilowatt array, if you look at the cost of solar, should not cost $400,000. I will concede that there were some cost estimates we had overlooked, like the cost of hooking up the array to the grid. On the other side of the coin, though, there were about $150,000 in project management fees that wouldn't come from your traditional developer. A lot of the costs seem to be inflated, and my partner and I were often wondering if these people, were they the right people for the job? So when we tried to go back to the university, they were like, we have talked to developers, we've done our own estimates. We don't think this quote is right. If you put the project out for bid to solar developers, we are very confident that a bid will come in around 100 to 150K. The university and their way of doing things doesn't like to work with firms or developers that it doesn't have previous relationships with. In fact, there's an entire auditing and verification process that any business who wants to work with the university has to go through prior. So we're kind of at a crosshairs in that we had this solar array, we had what we believed to be enough money, we had a location, but the university and their way of doing things had hired a group that wasn't best equipped to handle this situation, and as a result gave a cost estimate that was extremely non-cost effective. So I think when we're thinking of climate solutions here, we have to think of things that are fiscally responsible and what is the greatest outcome that we can gain for our financial inputs. And at the end of the day, the solar block and my project just wasn't one of those, which is frustrating when working with the university. But I think that just kind of keeps the dialogue moving further when we get back to these direct involvement versus case study approaches, that we would like to think if we put a proposal out there to the university, if they're using the right resources and right staff, we think that maybe they can come up with a cost-effective outcome and solution that integrates clean energy into our campus life. So that's the main example of this one approach. Another one is actually a project that ended up being successful. It just took arguably way more than it should have. So at some point, these have actually since been taken down. Michigan had 2 solar canopies on campus. And what a solar canopy was it was essentially a picnic table that had a roof structure to it with solar panels on top. And the essence of that is that there were outlets that would be powered by the solar panels. So people could charge their phones, use their laptops under these canopies, harnessing the power of the sun while being outside. They were really great. The issue with integrating the solar canopies into campus life was, again, the timeline of how long it took. This was a project that gained funding, I'm gonna approximate here, gained funding in 2015, yet it took one of our students in 2017 to actually get the project installed. So it was a project that kind of got passed down through the club. One group of students would make progress, they would graduate, have to pass it on to someone else, again, passing on to someone else who can finally install it. So I think the essence of what Aaron and I are saying here, this before we get into our takeaways, is just that it can be very difficult as a student here to enact the change that you seek when you step onto campus here. You can come in with a bold vision, but ultimately such a large institution like this has a different way of doing things. Things are slower. There needs to be a lot more approval. There are people who they want to work with and are going to trust, and that may not always be the person you want to work with. So as a result, being directly involved can sometimes be detrimental to the process. It can lead to frustration. It's overly demanding on the student. And at the end of the day, you might not always get the outcome you want. As opposed to the approach that Aaron mentioned with these case studies, if you're going very high level and broadly speaking, just this general policy and this is how it works, and showing how it can work in a university setting, this is something that can be achieved for a student in just one semester if they really want to. And it seems like it can have like more long-lasting positive impacts. So I think with that, Aaron and I will get into some of the takeaways here before we get into our Q&A session. So the first takeaway we have here is that, as I mentioned, students need to be able to work on a student-friendly timeline when engaging with climate solutions at the university. As I mentioned, we only have 4 years here as undergraduates. And as I mentioned again, it can sometimes take even longer than 4 years to make a project a reality. As opposed to, like I just said, with case studies, this is something that can be completed independently by a student in a semester, leaving the university to implement it after the student has come and gone. Conversely, this direct involvement requires back and forth meetings with the university. This can take months or years to make any meaningful grounds. And frankly, it's a timeline that's impractical given the brevity of our stints.
The second key takeaway we have is it's really important to target change at the right level. And by right level, we mean the underlying processes at the university. So in the examples of the PPA and the ref, they're not asking the question, what can we directly do on campus? It's more like by what means can we get the university to do many things? But this does have the challenge of there being a knowledge gap, because Drew talked about the group Architecture, Engineering, and Construction, AEC, which you would have to go through to do an installation on campus. And no freshman comes in knowing that they might have to work with AEC. And I think if you did a poll of seniors at U of M, I would be pleasantly surprised if even 1% of them knows that AEC exists. So the point there being that it's difficult to map student drive to knowledge of how this big beast that is all of the University of Michigan, how that beast operates.
Yeah, and then similarly, as our last takeaway is, we think it can be important in some cases to leave the university room to operate and implement the policy that maybe you're proposing. This creates less tension with the university's way of doing things. As I mentioned, students and university officials sometimes have different ways of thinking, different perceptions of how things can get done. At the end of the day, though, this is an institution that we have to work through. So rather than have someone get frustrated with us or have us get frustrated with someone, it can perhaps be beneficial at times to take a step back and realize exactly like the channel that we're trying to work through. How does it actually operate and what is it like? And I think this ultimately comes down to the fact that we don't always know how to do what we're proposing. It's maybe something we've read about, something that we think can really have a positive impact. But at the end of the day, we are undergraduate students. We are learning every day. And there have been people who have been doing this stuff their entire lives. So I think a little bit of humility sometimes goes a long ways. At the same time, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement of whether who's in charge is always appropriately equipped to tackle the issue at hand. As we know, climate change is a very unique issue, something that maybe engineers, policymakers who have long been in the industry don't know a ton about. So I think it is important to acknowledge that you have to respect tradition and people's way of working, but also understand that things are changing, and this is a very unique, specific issue that requires a very unique and specific skill set. So I think working on creating sort of a blend of that when you're working on solutions is something that goes long ways. So with that, I think that's the end of our presentation. And I think we have quite a bit of time for questions.
That was amazing. And I learned a lot about what you guys have done. I have like a whole list of questions, but I'm not going to start because I don't want to dominate because, you know, I will jump in if someone else doesn't first. But I see one question in the chat. Actually, a couple. Let's see. The first one is, what would you say you learned about inviting multiple representatives to the design and implementation of the project? Maybe Alicia, you could speak more to what you mean by that question.
If I can figure out.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Well, clearly, as students, they started with design and calculations, and they needed to extend that to the audience. And we find that in our daily lives as designers. I'm a landscape architect. So I truly wanted to find out how they learned and who they decided they should actively work with as they learn this whole business of solar energy and collection.
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of insight on that. So when I started out with the solar block M project, my partner and I, we heavily relied on some professors that served as advisors for us, as well as just kind of reaching out to solar developers in the community, sitting down with them and saying, like, what would something like this look like? Is this something that's feasible? How would you arrange the solar panels in a unique shape like an M? Is this something that can physically stand up? And like, what is the size to have? I think it's kind of a two-way street in that I think a large institution like the university wants to do things its way, but at the same time, in order to be taken seriously, we need to have a little bit of street credibility, saying that we worked with some professional groups already. So I think that's part of the challenge that we ran into, is that it seemed like we had credibility in working with these solar developers, but then the university was like, hold on, wait a minute, we want to work with these people who we trust. And then if they come out with an entirely different outcome, they're going to naturally want to trust the opinion of the group that they've worked with before, as opposed to the solar developer that we worked with, which to me can be frustrating in that I would deem one group more qualified to handle this specific topic than another. So I think a long-term strategy that would maybe mitigate this is getting the university in conversation and partnership with groups that we think are more appropriately aligned to tackle climate issues.
That's great. Yeah, and that kind of segues actually into this next question in the chat from Marcia, which says, does the university's School of Environment and Sustainability, which you guys are not in, correct? Right. Have a budget for its students to be able to develop such projects for the sake of better operation of the university and better achieve sustainability? Did you guys work with Cs at all, or because you're in LSA, correct?
Yeah, I can add a little bit here, Aaron, and then if you want to tack on, that'd be great. But so we actually did a lot of the funds that we received for the Solar Block M came from student or university funds for students. So the first $32,000 we received came from Planet Blue, which is a university like sub-organization dedicated to sustainability at the campus level. So we applied for a grant through them that was $32,000. We were able to get grant pledges from the Michigan student governments as well. I think one of the most frustrating components of the project was we did have to raise all the money ourselves. So to see that we had come that far, raised that much money, what should have been enough, and then to have the university go to a different perspective and come out with a different cost estimate, but then say, we're not going to cover the difference. I think that was something that was frustrating to deal with at the time. But yeah, there are a lot of opportunities and funds for student sustainability projects. It is just often difficult to do anything with them, given that they often require university approval and you have to jump through all those hoops that I had mentioned.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm gonna sneak a question in, then I'm gonna get John because I'm dying and I have a whole bunch. I'm curious about the work that you guys did around, well, both the VPPA research and the Revolving Energy Fund research. I'm wondering, first of all, in the product that was developed, could you see your work in there? In other words, did you feel represented? Did you feel that direct connection? And secondly, did they give acknowledgement or credit to Students for Clean Energy for any of the initial work they had done? Did they acknowledge that the connection there, or yeah?
Those are great questions. To my knowledge, in responding to the credit part, no. And I would say yes, that I could see our efforts in the ultimate product. And I know from some other conversations I've had with people who were more directly involved in fleshing out how the university would implement the REF and PPA respectively, they have said that they used those reports extensively in their own work. But there was a gap between initial idea and university actually going to the step of implementing it, where another group stepped in and did a more detailed analysis. In the case of both of those, I think at least the REF, the PPA might have come before the presidential, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
PCCN. Yes. But one of the things that worked in favor of the REF was that we presented those findings, and then the PCCN formed, and they they had these internal analysis teams, and those IATs were able to pick up our work and carry it forward. So, and that kind of gets potentially at the knowledge gap question a little bit, but what is the conduit from idea to implementation? At the time the IATs served that purpose, the PCCN and the IATs don't exist anymore. So that gap exists once again. And if the PCCN hadn't existed, I'm not sure that the REF ever gets to the point of being implemented.
Yeah, that's excellent. I was wondering about that. Who would you present to now? Something like the VPPA. Yeah, that's interesting. And then just to follow up real quick, the VPP, it's a VPPA, correct? It's not on site. Do you know where, if it's additive, if it's additional, and where it's being built, and what the projects are?
I know in the initial proposal, they were very explicit that it had to be additive. I have not read the actual RFP or whatever documentation has come since then. I certainly hope so. And as for location, the first PPA is throughout the thumb of Michigan.
That's great.
Throughout where?
Sorry, I
Where-
heard somebody. Alicia,
Yeah.
did you have a
throughout-
question?
Yeah, he said it was going to be done somewhere else, and I didn't catch what that was.
Oh, the thumb of Michigan.
Okay,
Yeah.
I-
Yeah.
I'm a Spartan, okay? But I would have thought that application to U of M's PR, so perhaps finding the right parties at U of M to be interested in this project, because certainly the M would be a big PR for the university. And then I know from Michigan State that campus park and planning can have their own agenda. So, but I want to say congrats to these both. And it's a great idea. And I hope they continue with moving forward.
Absolutely. John.
Well, that's what I want to ask. A part of the introduction was about the Students for Clean Energy is working to develop young people to be new leaders after you graduate. So I was wondering if both of you can talk about what is the mindset of students at University of Michigan in terms of how are they concerned about climate change? Are they supportive of renewable energy? And how you have gone about trying to develop new leadership so that because we all know that this is a huge struggle and GLREA we love the fact that young people are getting involved, and we want to encourage you to get involved and be a part of this movement once you graduate. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the student mindsets on campus and how you're developing new leaders for the future.
Those are great questions and challenging ones, and definitely ones that Drew and I have been thinking about as we're about to graduate ourselves. It's hard to speak to the overall student body, but I can provide two examples that might bode well. One is there's strong momentum building towards some sort of sustainability education requirement. Not entirely clear what that would look like just yet, but there'd be some sort of requirement in order to graduate that students would have to fulfill, to the point that it was a question on the recent central student government election ballot. So it's been talked about enough, it's in enough students' minds that central student government felt that it was worth putting that on the ballot. So that's one example. The second is there's a big advocacy push to the presidential hiring committee, since they're going to start interviews for candidates in June. And they conducted a series of town hall listening session type events, some for staff, some for students. And there was a coordinated push to have students interested in sustainability and carbon neutrality speak at these events. And now in the job description, which I believe you should be able to find online, there are about 7 or 8 different sections as highlighted as important for any potential candidates. And one of those sections is sustainability.
Yeah, adding on to that, I think a big role that we see our club attempting to play on campus is kind of spreading the word on what clean energy issues are that we face, the difficulties of implementing them, and just kind of a general awareness of how the clean energy industry operates. Based on, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure Aaron would agree, that as an undergraduate, it's kind of hard to learn about this sort of stuff. We have both had to sneak into signing up for graduate classes that teach this sort of stuff, because it's just not necessarily something that's emphasized as much as the undergraduate level, at the undergraduate level. I think a lot of what I've learned about this industry has been through reading the news, my own summer internships, this club, and some graduate courses that I've taken. But I'd say for the most part, I would say that CU's, the School for Environment and Sustainability, at the undergraduate level is a lot more focused on environmental topics at a broader level. And I think it's, since these issues are so important and these technologies are so important, kind of getting that into a broader audience is something that is really important and something that we're trying to accomplish.
Two quick responses. I saw the big article in the Michigan Daily about the open student letter that was released, and I thought that was wonderful. And then secondly, is there anything that GLREA could be doing to maybe help Cs educate students, or maybe there's a role that we could have to, because you're right, Drew. You know, I got into this business about 5 years ago. It was a steep learning curve for me, and I'm still learning. So yeah, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be taking, you know, going to school full time and trying to learn this stuff as well and be an advocate. So it is a challenge.
I'll say the one thought that comes to mind, again, getting back to this knowledge gap challenge as students cycle in every 4 years or so. And this is a challenging ask of GLREA, but if you can identify ways, key ways that impactful change can be made at U of M, since GLREA is going to be around and more constant than the student body, what you could do is reach out to students and say, hey, I have an idea for you. I'd love for you, here's the concept, here's how you could go about it, but you're the student. I want to help you bring this to fruition.
Yeah, and I think the community partnerships that we've kickstarted is potentially an initiative that will add some longevity and stability to our mission. So for those of you on the call who aren't aware, something our club started this semester really was what we'd call a community partnerships program, where our club can partner with a clean energy affiliated organization in the Michigan community. So GLREA is one of our partners. We have partnerships with some solar developers. And really it's an opportunity for students to learn about what a career at this specific company or sector looks like, as well as creating professional engagement opportunities for these students if GLREA needs help with research on a policy topic or something like that. It really creates an avenue for that. So I think we're excited moving forward that as students come and go, hopefully SFC will still have GLREA, and that'll add some stability, as I mentioned, to kind of like keep momentum going, even if we have new students coming in, just having that, knowing we can count on you.
Great. Really good. Kate.
Thank you. I really appreciated your presentation, both the good and the bad of it. I would add too, I think you've had such an uphill struggle because you have not had guidance from too many professors, unless you could sneak into a graduate class, and guidance from when you approach the board of here's the project we'd like to do, and they choose a different builder than you. I think there's a knowledge gap of the board of directors of the university or the people that you had to approach. And the knowledge gap there would be, you know, so much more than they do. And you've vetted these people that you were going to suggest to build, but that's out of their comfort zone. And my other question, I mean, that was a statement. And I wonder, for Western Michigan University, I'm from near Kalamazoo, we tapped into the endowment for Western. And I've also looked, well, is the endowment for University of Michigan, what does their investment portfolio look like? Are they investing in coal? Are they investing in oil? Or are they investing in renewables? And on campus, does the U of M use coal or oil or some renewable type of process for heating and cooling and lighting the university? And it'd be nice to point out what it is. Thank you.
Yes and yes. And when the President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality was formed in 2019, they were charged with proposing a plan for the university to achieve carbon neutrality by, I don't know if there was a target date at the time. And the two things they were not allowed to bring to the table were divesting from fossil fuels and shutting down a natural gas-fired central power plant.
Wow.
Since then, the university has made a commitment to, I think they've said they'll stop new investments in fossil fuels and they'll divest by 2050, which is long after we know it won't be an economically viable proposition anyway. The central power plant is really the big elephant in the room. They recently expanded it. You simply can't have a conversation about decarbonizing the university without shutting down the central power plant, and it's going to come at a huge financial loss. That there's no way around that.
There's, am I correct about are they starting geothermal retrofits in the buildings on North Campus? Is the goal to have geothermal heating and cooling for the entire campus? And if so, I assume that would divest from the gas power plant? No?
Yeah, so my understanding is the regents have approved a geothermal installation on one North Campus building. I'm not sure how large that building is and how large of an impact that'll have in terms of carbon reductions. I think it's kind of being viewed as a pilot project, and if it's successful, would in theory be implemented on a larger scale. I think that is the larger vision there. At the same time, though, as Aaron mentioned, there is this combined heat and power natural gas plant that's currently providing heat to the university and then plans to expand it. So there seem to be conflicting investments, and it will result in a financial loss.
Well, that segues to a question here. There's two, Ken and Marcia. I'm going to go with Marcia's first because it segues to that, which is, this is an election year. Will there be new regents elected to the University of Michigan? And if so, maybe you should try to make sure that the ones who would push, you know, the sort of carbon plan, and also, and she says, push the university to do more with students in this area. But so in addition to the presidential search, you know, targeting the regents. Yeah. And then there's one from Ken that is kind of an interesting perspective that says, I sense that these successful quote unquote initiatives that Aaron presented seem to be more results oriented, while the less successful ones that Drew presented seem to be more symbolic or demonstration. Is this a reasonable way to understand this? I don't know if you want to reflect on that.
Yeah, when you said Ken, I had to check, and Ken Winter, not Ken Bookvar, who's my dad, who's on the call. Hi, Dad.
Oh,
Um,
different Ken.
I don't know the answer to Marcia's question. That would be a great thing to figure out. Very, very good point there. As to Ken's point, I think that is that's definitely one of that is a clear difference between the two types of projects. But with respect to where we see challenges, I suspect it's less to do with the type, the way that you framed it in the chat, and more to do with how many hoops you have to jump through with the university to make it happen. And so the two less successful examples were direct installations on campus. And I think that's the key feature of them that made them more challenging, not necessarily that they were visibility projects.
Yeah, got it. Other folks that have, you know, you can, there's a little reactions button at the bottom. You can click on that and raise your virtual hand, or you can just pop on camera and wave if you can't figure that out. And I love that your dad's here, Aaron. Ken, Aaron's dad, you must be like crazy proud of this kid. Kate, did you, is that your hand up?
That is my hand up. I have a question in the chat. Just
Oh.
as an older person that doesn't always understand some of this technological jargon, Drew put in, it looks like eyebrows. And what does that mean, please? In the chat?
Oh,
Oh.
probably he was agreeing with something, the comment above.
Yeah, I
something
was
like
just
that.
pointing out Aaron was talking about the canopies.
So that means I agree.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other comments for these guys or questions?
Well, I just want to make a comment because I think what these two young men have done is really amazing work, and you should be very proud of yourselves. But I also want to encourage you, as we're getting near the end of the semester, that I don't know who's going to be taking over your student organization, but I definitely want to make sure that they feel free to reach out to me anytime, and that we want to continue to work with the new leadership of your organization over the summer or next fall. So definitely encourage them to reach out to me, because we signed the agreement, and we think that's really important to continue, this work with your colleagues after you graduate. And I'm also really excited because I think you two are going to be taking jobs in the renewable energy fields after you graduate, which I think is really exciting as well.
Okay, wait a minute. Tell us.
So can I respond to John's comment about leadership first?
Okay.
I meant to respond earlier when you asked, how are students training the next leaders? And it's important for us as the current leadership to be aware that it's something we need to do. And I think Drew and I have done a good job of that. Not quite sure how to make sure that all leaders across all student orgs do that, but we do plan on connecting you at least via email with next year's president and vice presidents. But I did want to point out, sorry to put you on the spot, Katie, but we have one of our younger members of SFCE here who will be our R&D director next year. I have a feeling she's going to be around and doing really good things over the next 3 or so years. So Katie, meet John and Julie, and John and Julie, Katie.
Nice meeting you, Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks. Thanks, Aaron.
Very good.
But in response to the other question, Julie, I'm going to be working for a clean tech company called Voltus that does demand response, which is a power grid service. That's my next step.
That's wonderful, Drew.
And I will be moving out to San Francisco, California. I'm going to be working at a consulting firm that specializes in energy and sustainability services. And I'll be predominantly working more so on like the regulatory affairs side, working with some public utility commissions and doing some decarbonization planning, that sort of stuff.
That's fantastic. Well, if you can learn how they're doing it in California and then come back here and try and work with Michigan's utilities and regulatory environment, that would be great. We'd appreciate that, Drew.
I'll try to give you some tips.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think we're pretty close to time. I'm really, really grateful that you guys came on here and spent this hour with us and everybody here. Thank you for coming and learning from these students who have done amazing work and far more than I ever did with my 4 years of undergraduate, which, I thought were pretty enriching, but I'm certainly grateful to you for all that you have done in actionable steps to move us forward. Really impressive, you guys. And thanks for coming. And we appreciate you. And feel free to come to any of the Thursday energy events. If they look interesting to you, you can look at the schedule. You can sign up for the regular emails and then you'll get them. And some of them might look interesting. Stop in. So I think that's it. Don't tell me who won the hockey game. I'm going to go.
Me too.